Thank you so much for being here. I'm gonna let you introduce yourself because that's way better.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. And thank you. I'm excited to be able to talk with you today. I've taken a look at the program and some of the presentations that you've had, including in the recent past, and it looks like fantastic programming. So I'm going to be talking about cognition, cognitive health, and really I want to talk about the relationship between cognitive health and this concept of neuroplasticity, changes in the brain. And I'll be doing it through the lens of, well, brain games. Really, this is software for cognitive training or cognitive assessments. I think there may be some overlap between some of the topics here and some topics that you've heard in recent presentations from other speakers. I'll probably be adding a bit of a different perspective here, but I think it'll be great if you get to a topic that you have questions about, please shout out. We can do more questions at the end, but we can keep this very conversational throughout. So please jump in at any time. I'll start with a very brief introduction of myself. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So I'm an academic neuroscientist. I started out doing research in the lab, focused on the neural basis of attention, specifically visual attention. So our eyes and our brains are taking in all this information every moment in the day when we have our eyes open. How do we make sense of this? How do we make sense of the world around us? So starting at the level of individual neurons, and over the last 15 years, I've gone from the academic side, research at universities, and now I am working at a company, so kind of turned entrepreneur here, and the research focus has gone from, well, I used to write papers about electrical signals from individual neurons. You've got 100 billion neurons in your brain, and now we've got millions or billions of people in the world, and now most of my research interests are at the level of thousands or millions of people. So really spanning everything from single neurons now up to people around the world and how their cognition is trained and improved. I do this through the creation of software. So the company where I am, we create digital health software. Some of this is for assessment to measure cognition. Some of it is therapeutic or interventional, so it's to train cognition, and I'll describe a little bit more about this later on. What I want to do first, before talking about some of these products, the most important takeaway, the real message here, there won't be a quiz at the end, but if there were, this is the answer to that quiz. There's really one main takeaway, and actually I think I'm probably preaching to the choir just by the fact that you're sitting in this room. So I believe that every person in this room, and that counts the Zoom room, can learn to use their brain more effectively, right? And I think that's what so many of us believe here. So through things like managing stress, through nutrition, through good sleep, through social interaction, physical exercise, cognitive stimulation, through these things, we can actually actively impact our cognitive health. We can improve the way that we're using our minds. And actually, I use this language very intentionally, use their brain more effectively. There are also things like learning mnemonics, learning techniques, learning different ways of doing things that our brains need to help us with. I think there are many, many, many different ways that we can learn to use our brains more effectively. What I'm going to focus on today is this concept of, well, what are those changes in the brain that actually translate to our brains working a little bit differently, a little bit more effectively? And so for this, I want to introduce this concept of neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity, the basic definition is simply, okay, neuroplasticity, this is the fact that it's the ability of the brain to change its structure or its function. And I want to start from kind of a skeptical position here. From one perspective, this is really a boring or trivial concept, right? So every time I learn something new, if I meet someone and they tell me their name, or if I try a new food, if I have any new experience, that changes my behaviors and my habits. That must be related to a change in my brain, the way that my brain is functioning, right? There's nothing that I can do as a person that is not related to the activity in my brain. So from this point of view, neuroplasticity is kind of a trivial concept, and neuroplasticity has become sort of a buzzword, and I want to look at this with a level head. But here's why I will argue that it actually is very powerful. So it means that our brains kind of by the way that they are structured and designed, they can take in new information, they can take on new challenges throughout our lives. And it means that there's always this opportunity to improve a bit about the way that your brain is structured or the way that it functions. It means that there's always that opportunity to try something to actually make a change that is a meaningful change in your brain. So I'm going to focus even more specifically on one kind of neuroplasticity that I like the most. This is experience-dependent neuroplasticity. So experience-dependent neuroplasticity is pretty much what it sounds like here. So it's neuroplasticity, changes in the structure or function of your brain that are a result of experience. They're a result of the way your brain is working, the interactions with the environment around you. And this becomes even more powerful. So your brain can set you up to interact with the world in certain ways. You can use it in certain ways. You can challenge it in certain ways. And as a result of those things, that can actually change the way that your brain works, the way that it's structured, or the way that it functions. Imagine if you could train yourself to actually seek out the novel, the stimulating, the challenging, these things that could, that could actually support healthy cognition. And so this concept of experience-dependent neuroplasticity, you can take on activities that can then in turn change your brain's structure or function. I think this is kind of the most fun aspect of neuroplasticity. So that's where I'll be spending the most time here. So before we go into some of these activities, I do want to say a little bit more about neuroplasticity. So like I said, neuroplasticity, I think, has become sort of a buzzword. It's a hot topic. I want to, again, approach it with a level head. Let's talk about how it works in the brain, but also how it doesn't work. So what isn't the way that we should think about neuroplasticity in our brain? So here are several things that could have to do with neuroplasticity. So one is the adult brain could grow new neurons. And in the last 10 or 20 years, this was really the exciting hot topic. The picture here is a friend and colleague of mine who also has led a bunch of research at Lumos Labs. And so he, we can see all of the folds and wrinkles in there. Imagine if you could just grow new neurons whenever you needed to do something. Well, the problem here is that there was a lot of excitement around the discovery of adult neurogenesis, growing new neurons, even in the adult brain and in certain parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, that's really important for various aspects of cognition. But upon further research, there are groups that have actually argued against that either it doesn't exist at all, or just that it's a very small, it has a very small impact on the function of your brain. And I will say this, so for people who argue for the growth of new neurons in the adult brain, these are like 1,000 neurons a day. That's kind of the approximation. Now, if you remember, you have 100 billion neurons. If we're talking about 1,000 new neurons a day, this could be quite interesting for something quite specific, but that's less than a drop in the bucket. If we think about the function of all of these neurons in your brain, these circuits that are important for all of your, your ability to remember things, pay attention, for your everyday cognition, this is probably not the type of neuroplasticity that's having a big impact on that. So, exciting concept, plenty more to study there, but that's not what I'm going to be focusing on. Another type of neuroplasticity. So your brain can create or prune connections between neurons. And this was another type of neuroplasticity that got a lot of excitement, a lot of press. This idea, imagine if you could actually rewire your brain, have a connection go from this part of your brain to this part of your brain that didn't used to be there. And I'll admit, it does sound really exciting. And some of the initial research is very exciting. So people recovering from traumatic brain injury, after a while, their brains could remodel in a pretty extensive way. And you can actually get these like connections between different parts of the brain. What I'll say here is some of these studies have been more difficult for other groups to reproduce. There's a lot more hesitation around talking about this as a broad phenomenon that is going to be impacting your everyday cognition. There's something exciting there still. But again, in terms of these millions and billions of neurons that actually help with your everyday cognition, this is exciting, but probably not the type of neuroplasticity that we should be thinking about when we're talking about how healthy sleep and stress management and all these things can help us. So what is the type of neuroplasticity that I get the most excited about? It's probably the one that sounds the most boring, but I'm going to argue that it's not. Your brain can strengthen or weaken existing connections. Your brain is this massively interconnected network. Again, 100 billion neurons. Each neuron on average is connected to 10,000 others. The scale of this is just staggering. Now imagine that you could actually change change the strength of these connections. Even if you could just change things by, make it a couple percent stronger or a couple percent weaker, if you could do that across the brain, you could really change the way that this thing functions. You could make circuits more efficient. You could change which is kind of the primary way, the dominant way that your brain would solve certain problems. This ability to strengthen or weaken existing connections is such a powerful way for thinking about how your brain's function might change. And actually, it should make a lot of sense to us from the point of view of physical exercise. So let's say I haven't been to the gym in a long time, I come in and I start to do biceps curls. What's my goal? I'm not trying to grow a muscle where a muscle didn't exist, right? I'm not trying to invent a new muscle group. What I want to do is be able to make my biceps and these muscle groups, make them stronger, make them more efficient, and that can have a real impact on my mobility, on my motion, on my life, on my strength, right? And we can think about the brain in a very similar way. This is a powerful concept. Our brains can change, and we can selectively strengthen and weaken different connections within the brain. So that's where I'm going to be focusing my attention here.
Are there options, instances where you do want to weaken conditions?
Yes. So are there times when you want to weaken connections? So absolutely. Well, first of all, there are plenty of things that I would like to unlearn. So maybe I find out that I've been accomplishing some task in a really inefficient way, and I learn that there's a better technique. My automatic response might still be something that is inefficient. That's not the way I want to do it. I need to be able to remind myself, no, there's a different way to do it. And what do I do then? I repeat it. I repeat it over and over again, right? So a lot of this experience-dependent neuroplasticity comes from this concept of repetition. This, you may have heard, fires together, wires together in the brain. So if you get the same circuit to be kind of activated over and over again, you can train yourself now to do something a different way than what would have been automatic. I think there are other examples during development. So we think about over the course of a child's development about kind of maturity of the different parts of the brain. Actually, a big part of development is pruning excess connections in the brain. So children have more connections, more connectivity than an adult brain. It's kind of too densely connected. And so pruning these connections is actually an important part of development. And this is an important type of neuroplasticity for cognitive health throughout the lifespan. So neuroplasticity supports longevity in a couple important ways. So one, Well, this is just saying, yeah, it is, you know, it lasts throughout the lifespan. It's critical for healthy aging. So for one, it does allow you to learn and improve throughout your life. So any new experience, any new skill that you learn, any new fact that you learn is kind of at some point translated to changes in your brain, right? Also, it provides this really valuable redundancy. Redundancy almost often sounds like a bad thing. In your brain, redundancy can be very good. So redundancy can mean alternative solutions within your brain networks. So imagine you need to get a signal from neuron A to neuron B, and there's one path through your brain. This neuron talks to that one, to that one, to that one, and we get to where we need to go. If anything happens to your brain, if there's damage, if just over the course of aging, if something happens to this connection and it's broken, you can no longer do that. You can no longer send the signal from A to B, right? That would be terrible. You would lose that capacity. What if instead there is denser connectivity and there are many different paths from A to B, and importantly, we can make some of those paths stronger or weaker. Now, if something happens, if you have an injury or whatever else happens, and one of those pathways is actually compromised, you can, over time, strengthen alternative pathways and still get the signal where it needs to go. And this is behind this concept of brain reserve or cognitive reserve, which is a lifetime of having done, you know, cognitive stimulating and generally healthy activities can lead to a more resilient brain network where it's not so susceptible to small injuries that would then kind of take out the whole network. So this type of neuroplasticity, this idea of selectively kind of changing the weights of these connections, I like to think about this when I think about activities that I can do to support good cognitive health. And so now I will introduce, Luminosity. I work at the company that creates the Luminosity brain training program. I want to share a handful of things about Luminosity here. This is by no means kind of a pitch that Luminosity is the thing that you must do. In fact, some people love Luminosity. If it's not for you, then there are other activities that can do this type of thing. I think it's a fantastic lens for thinking about human cognition, both for measurement of it and also for improvement of it. So here's an introduction to Luminosity. Actually, a quick show of hands. Is anyone here familiar with Luminosity? Has anyone here tried out Luminosity before? Okay, so Luminosity it's an online cognitive training or brain training program. And it's designed as a set of brief games. And each game targets a different cognitive process or cognitive function. So things like attention or memory or flexibility. And it's really designed like a gym for your brain. So you come in each day, and I say come in virtually to the website or the app. There are workouts, there are games that are waiting for you to play. You train your memory or your attention. And with these daily sessions, there's feedback, there are statistics, there are insights into your training, your performance. So this is what Luminosity is. Over the years, Luminosity has gotten a really a big membership. There are more than 100 million Luminosity users around the world. And so some of the things that I'll talk about in a little bit are just what are some of the insights that we can learn about cognition through this really just fantastic window into the mind, this kind of data set of understanding how different people use Luminosity and then how that impacts their cognition. A little bit more on the Luminosity games themselves. So here are a couple example games, but the main point is Luminosity games are adaptations of cognitive tasks used in the lab or the clinic. So here are two on the screen. I don't know if you can see my pointer. Did that come through a bit? This is too small, I realize now to see. The one on the left here, this is called a self-ordered pointing task. So you start out with a paper version, and the rules for this task are, okay, I'll show you a set of objects, pick one object. Now I'll show you another set, but you can't pick the same object. You have to pick a new one, something that's novel, something that you haven't picked yet. And you keep going, sort of collecting this mental collection of objects, and you see how far you can go before you forget what you had already put in your mental bag and you accidentally pick something again. So we've translated that into this game at the bottom. We call this game Title Treasures. In this one, you're on a beach and you're actually collecting these items, but it's the same rules as that original task. So we take the original task, we adapt it, we translate it, we turn it into a game that's actually fun to play. On the right-hand side, this is an example of an n-back task, an n-back memory task. N can take on any number, and it just says, okay, for I'm going to show you an object. Does this match the object that you saw n objects ago? So let's say n is 1. Does this match the object that you saw 1 object ago? So I'm looking at a triangle. Did I see a triangle on my last one? Okay, yes. Now I'm shown a circle. Does that match the object on the last one? No, that was a triangle. So the answer would be no. And I need to keep going and updating my memory. And this can become more and more challenging if I have to remember back more objects in the past. We've translated this into a handful of different games. I've got an interactive one here. So this is a game called Ebb and Flow. Ebb and Flow is a task switching game. So we're going to have some participation here. I'm going to show a video. The rules here, the rules are these leaves can either be green or orange. If they are green, we have to say which way they're pointing. So right here, they're all pointing down. They're also going to be drifting across the screen. If they are orange, forget about which way they're pointing and instead say, which way are they drifting? And they're going to switch back and forth. I was going to say sounds easy, right? But I hear maybe it doesn't sound. Yeah. So we're going to stay on our mental toes, and we can shout them out. So I will start playing this. Okay. So they're green now. So I would say down, down, left. Okay. It switched, right? So now down, up, up, up. Now down, left, up, right, down, up, left, down. So if you can see, this is, you can probably see the similarity to whatever lab task this came from, where, you know, someone was sitting in front of a screen doing a psych experiment here, but actually it's a fun, challenging game to do. So in this one, you need to stay on your task switching toes. And these games, they do two different things. One is they will actually give you a reflection of your performance on these games, so kind of a measurement. And then they'll also, through this repeated practice, through this idea, okay, well, I can train myself to do this particular skill over and over again. I can try to, the idea here is strengthening those circuits that are responsible for that cognitive task. Altogether, there are dozens of different games here. So you can find, let's see, up at the top, that's that ebb and flow game. And these games span now many different cognitive domains. So task switching, response inhibition, spatial reasoning, so all these different areas. So you can imagine the way that we think about it is there's no individual thing that you're doing that is like special and unique on its own, but rather when you put these all together, now you're able to span a number of different cognitive skills that are useful to practice, that are good for kind of giving your brain like varied stimulation and for practicing these different skills. Again, similar to a physical gym where, yeah, maybe there's not one single place in the gym that is the best for you to be spending your time, but rather think about it as, if I'm able to go to these different stations to do some strength, to do some treadmill, some elliptical, some biceps curls, some leg presses, if I'm able to do these, then I can span several different things that are helpful to train on.
So how do people pick the ones they want to train on?
Yeah, good question. So how do people pick the ones they want to train on? So two answers to that question. So the first is there is a recommended workout. So when you come in, there's a set of games that is actually ready and waiting for you. And that is determined with a few things in mind. So one is breadth. So this concept of wanting to stretch you in different ways rather than have you do the same thing over and over again. So it's trying to get you to span these different cognitive skills. Preference certainly comes into it. If people have a preference for training certain cognitive domains, that's taken into account. Also your history. So if it knows that you, there's some like personalization in there, but there's also the opportunity to pick and choose. And some people certainly do have favorites. There's one, I don't know if you see a picture of a train on here. There's one game, it's called Train of Thought. Train of Thought has been played more than 1 billion times on its own, this one game. There are people who have played Train of Thought thousands of times, and I'll admit it is a really, really fun game. So some of it is just enjoyment, and people can, pick which one. Another pattern that's pretty common is someone will have a favorite game for a few weeks and they can feel that they are getting better. They can see the improvements in their scores. There are different levels of difficulty, so kind of challenges, and they'll work on that for a while, and then they'll switch to a different one and have a different favorite for a while. So what we've learned, so now putting it together. So we talked a bit about this concept of neuroplasticity. This is sort of the motivation behind, well, why does Luminosity exist? Why did we want to create software that does this? And then now that Luminosity exists, what can we learn based on that? There are two main parts here. So one is, I mentioned that the games do two different things. They measure cognitive skills, and then through practice, they train these cognitive skills. One thing that we've learned is really on this measurement side. So we have a program where we make our data set all de-identified. So anonymous data from Luminosity users in the real world, we make it available to qualified university researchers. And they've done some really fantastic work looking at performance on Luminosity games as it relates to these lifestyle factors that many people in this room are interested in. Yes. Yes.
Can you repeat that for the?
Oh, yes. So the question is, could you use this to detect decreases, so changes in cognitive performance that might be going, in the wrong way, that might help alert you to something else that's going on? And the short answer is yes. I'll go into that in a little bit more. I think a couple of the things that I'll mention here speak to that on maybe a smaller scale. But yes, that is something that you could use this for. I will likely go into more depth than I intended to on the next couple of slides. I was going to just show a couple examples of things that have been done using this Luminosity data set in that way, but based on some of the questions already, this might be a good topic to unpack some more. So we can measure the effects of lifestyle on cognition. Let me just show you a couple examples of how this has been done. So this paper here, again, I apologize for the wordiness. I'll read it out and I'll sort of tell you the main results here. So this is work by day and sleep by night. Do not sleep too little or too much. So this is the effects of sleep duration, time of day, and circadian synchrony on flanker task performance in this internet brain game. So what they did here, so this was a group from the University of California at San Francisco. They took Luminosity performance, and also these same people playing Luminosity reported how much sleep they were getting, whether they considered themselves to be like night owls or morning birds, so kind of what was their preferred time of the day to be productive. And they looked at whether the previous night's sleep and someone's report about when they're most productive, does that actually come through? Like, is that measurable in these Luminosity scores? And indeed, yes, these things were measurable. So a couple of the main results here, one was actually performance on a few different cognitive domains. Performance gets worse, of course, if you don't have enough sleep the night before, but also if you have too much sleep. So if you are someone who tends to get 7 or 8 hours a night, there were subtle but measurable and, significant differences in a bad way if you got 9 hours of sleep the night before, or especially 10 hours of sleep the night before. So kind of this idea that that having too little sleep or too much sleep can actually be harmful for cognitive performance. And there's some truth to this point about the time of day that you consider yourself most productive. So there were these interactions between, okay, well, I consider myself a morning, a morning person, but then I was playing the games later in the day. And they looked at this fantastic data set. It's a way that you can measure cognition that they wouldn't have been able to do with the standard kind of paper and pencil lab task. So this is measuring the impact of sleep on cognition. Another example, this was educational attainment. So could we look at just of people using Lumosity, were there changes and was there performance that mapped on to the amount of formal education? And short answer is yes, they were. Yes, there were. This was a group from UC Berkeley. I don't have the examples in here, but a couple others that I'll mention. Recent papers from a group that was looking at air pollution, so air quality, and also specifically wildfire smoke. So they had these maps of air quality across the United States. They could look at that and then add in the Lumosity gameplay from around the United States in these cases, and they were actually able to find measurable changes where the wildfire smoke or the air pollution led to worse performance on these Lumosity games. And now I think your question was probably over time for an individual person, what about picking up on changes that are, kind of decreases in cognitive performance over time that might be able to signal to you, hey, you should talk to your doctor about this. Maybe there's something going on. That's something that we're working on right now. I believe that there is signal in there, but that's still at quite an early stage. So this was the games to measure cognition. The other side of it, and I'll just talk for a few minutes on, what about, going back to the neuroplasticity, what about the idea that you play these games, you practice these different cognitive domains, can that actually drive any kinds of improvements in cognition? And we've looked at that in a few different ways. So we can test for improvements that are related to using Lumosity, using kind of this like daily exercise of these cognitive functions. One way that we've done that is through what's called a randomized controlled trial. So a randomized controlled trial, the randomized part means we had participants that were randomly put into a group that was doing some Lumosity training or into another comparison group. That's the controlled part. So the control group here, comparison group, they were doing crossword puzzles, so something else that's kind of mental stimulation here. And what we did was we compared performance on cognitive tests, not on the games, but on separate cognitive tests that the people had not practiced. We look at performance at the beginning of the study, and then at the end of the study, after they had done a fair amount of training, a fair amount of use of either the Lumosity program or the crosswords. So there were participants that they were told to use their program for 15 minutes a day, about 5 days a week for 10 weeks. We looked at change in performance on computerized tests that measure cognition, also on surveys, self-reported measures. So people say, we had questions related to real life cognitive successes and failures, things like, how often did I misplace my items around the house, like keys or my wallet? Or how often did I have to reread a passage in my book because I got to the end of it and realized that I didn't remember what I had just read? So what we found was really exciting. So we found improvements on both of these types of measures after 10 weeks of Lumosity use. And we found that those improvements were bigger than the improvements in the control group. And so I'm a scientist. I love graphs, so I couldn't help but put a couple in here. I will describe what's going on here, and there won't be too many graphs. The one on the left is sort of the main result here. So we see two bars, a red one and a blue one. The blue one is the average improvement on those computerized cognitive tests for people who did the Luminosity training. The red one is the average improvement on cognitive tests for the people doing the crosswords training. So you can see that both groups had a bit of an improvement, but that improvement was larger for the group doing the cognitive training, the Luminosity program. The next one over, it's actually the same data, but it breaks it up into each of the individual computerized tests. So on the left, this is a summary. This is if you essentially take the average across all of these different tests. On the right, now we can look at them individually. So there was a forward memory span, a reverse memory span, grammatical reasoning. Progressive matrices is like a logical reasoning test, a go, no-go test, arithmetic reasoning, this two-target search. And you can see in many, but not all cases, the blue bar is bigger than the red bar. There's an interesting exception here for grammatical reasoning. The improvement from the crosswords group was bigger than the improvement for the Luminosity group. And maybe that's not so surprising, right? This was a group that had done Luminosity training for 10 weeks. I actually think that that exception is a really nice one for illustrating this point, that the activities that you choose to take on, the way that you are training and using your brain, if you do this in a targeted, practiced way, this can translate to improvements that actually then get used in other things outside of the games.
So why do you need grammatical reasoning? What do you do with that?
So why did you say, why do you need it, or
Yeah.
why do you need the test, or why do we need grammatical
What do we do
reasoning
with
in our
our
lives?
grammatical reasoning ability? How does that help us?
Actually, that question is a good one for any of these individual tests. So yeah, why do we need it? I think that there are, so for each of these, you can imagine a number of different everyday activities that might use that skill. And so the framework for thinking about this is you're improving these underlying skills, and then when you're doing something in your life that needs to use that, you might be a bit better at that. So I'll say a very straightforward one, forward memory span. So forward memory span, this can take a spatial form or a like digit form. I'll use the digit example. So I'm going to show you a sequence of numbers. We're just going to see how many can you remember. So these sequences will get longer and longer. We'll see how far you can go. If you can get better at that, then you might remember phone numbers better. Well, who remembers phone numbers these days? You just type it into your phone, I suppose. But remembering phone numbers or credit card numbers or whatever else, that would be sort of a natural way to use that. For grammatical reasoning, the grammatical reasoning test is this. There are somewhat complex statements that include double negatives and kind of various wording that is tough to interpret. And so improving that might be useful if you are trying to interpret something that you're reading or having a conversation where the message is a little bit tough to decipher. So I think this grammatical reasoning skill is something that could be used in your everyday communication or reading.
Something keeps running through.
Oh. And I'm sorry. I two questions. We'll take them both here. Let's start. Yeah, let's start there.
Instead of directly going to the foreign language, there might be some
Luminosity.
Or if I wanted to learn to play an instrument, read. Might be some.
I will. Yeah. So this is a great question. So if I want to learn a foreign
Could you please
language,
repeat the question?
Yes. So the question was, if I want to learn something specific, so I want to learn a foreign language, I could either go and try to learn that foreign language, or am I saying that there's actually some Luminosity thing that I could be doing to help me learn that? Or if I wanted to, so for any specific thing that I want to learn, is the idea that instead of learning that thing, I should be learning that underlying skill. I'll say, if you already know the specific thing that you want to learn, it's probably most effective to go and learn that thing. So if I want to learn Spanish, I would go and take a Spanish course. Maybe the analogy here might be something like cross training. So if I want to be a soccer player, certainly I need to go and learn how to shoot my, practice my shots over and over again. I need to get extremely fine-tuned practice at those soccer skills. But I may also want to practice my mobility. I may want to do some lateral movements. I may want to practice my leg strength. I may want to practice my cardiovascular health. I may want to practice a number of other kind of core foundational things that won't necessarily help me on that particular kick, put it right where I need to in the goal, but they could be supportive of my general soccer play. So, right. So for learning a new language, if you want to learn Spanish, but some of these cognitive skills are certainly used during language production and kind of comprehension. And so the idea would be more of the foundation, the underlying foundation behind things. Yes, did you have?
This is so fantastic. There's so many things going through my mind. I'm getting a feeling that this has something to do with artificial intelligence.
That
What you're
Luminosity does.
talking about. Because my nephew, who's now retired, was a big shot at CBS executive, and he retired to Texas, and he's very happy playing golf, but somebody offered him a job because they heard that he had the history of being an executive, and they wanted not a resume, but they wanted him to write a letter of what he was about. And he started to think about himself, and he wrote it down, and he put it in the computer and came up with a perfect lead-in resume written in conversational form. I can do this, I can do
Right.
that. And he said it was exactly what he thought, but he couldn't quite put it to words because he had secretaries and he had everything that he
Sure.
didn't have to do, but he had this tremendous job. But he didn't know how to express it. And that's what happened. He just called in and said, this is what I want to do, and this is what I've done.
Well,
And
so
they hired him.
interesting. And so the question was, is there a connection here between this and artificial intelligence? And then, so interesting story. I think that artificial intelligence, these kind of programs or software that can do some pretty interesting things. One question is whether they're doing that in the same way that the brain would accomplish that. And I don't know enough to know what it is doing in kind of a human-like way or not. I think that there are a number of really impressive examples of artificial intelligence that I've seen, but I don't know enough to understand how it relates to some of these cognitive domains and the way that a human would go about training them. I will mention there was one of these big artificial intelligence companies that actually came to us and inquired about use of the Luminosity games to help train their reasoning models. And we did not end up going through that, but they were interested in more of a human-like way for training some of these things. So
Thank you.
well, this is just about the end of the slides here, and we can open it up to any other questions. What I want to point out, so I mentioned these results here came from a randomized controlled trial. So we ran a study to look at this. We can also look at this, and when I say this is how Luminosity training, how practice on these games might transfer or translate to improvements on other things that you're doing besides the training. We can look at that in the data from real people using Luminosity. So again, all use of the data is de-identified or anonymous, but we've had hundreds of thousands of people who have used Luminosity and also taken a separate battery of computerized cognitive tests at multiple points in time. And we can say, okay, well, you took that test twice. You did a bunch of Luminosity training in between. Let's see how that impacted your performance. So This is the same concept, but now looking at more than 100,000 people who use Lumosity. So those circles there, those are actually, each circle is 5,000 people. What we're looking at is the change in performance on these cognitive tests. So higher, farther up is better. That's bigger improvement on the cognitive tests. As a function of how many Lumosity games did they play in between those tests. So you can see down here, they didn't play very many Lumosity games, and they had a small improvement. This probably comes from the fact that they've now taken those tests before. They know what they're about. They do a little bit better. But if they, as they played more games, that translated to a bigger improvement in performance on these tests. So this is another way we can look at the same thing. It's just consistent with that last one. We can look at it through running a study. We can look at it with real world data. But this idea is that you can see the impact of the practice there. And the last thing, the last slide here is brand new news. So what we wondered was, so Lumosity is designed for a general audience, people of all ages. And there have been a number of really compelling initial studies run by university researchers using our software, and they wanted to use Lumosity with various clinical populations. So there are all kinds of medical conditions where impaired cognition is a really important part of that. And so there was some interesting initial data around this approach, this kind of cognitive training, brain training approach for treating medical conditions. For the last couple of years, we have been running our own big clinical trials. And just last week, we actually, we received clearance from the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, for a digital therapeutic. So this is actually digital medicine using these games to improve attention in adult ADHD. So this is kind of a first example of taking this approach for a medical purpose, and we hope to do more of this sort of thing in the future.
So that implies that your company, Lumos Labs, has a whole research department, people that this is their job, is to mine their data.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And go out and run the type of clinical trials that the FDA wants to see, which is a little bit different than how we would have done it through the.
So how many
data
people
mining.
is that? Hundreds?
We're small.
Thousands?
No, we're only 40 people or so. But for the clinical trials, we worked with investigators that are not part of the company. Yeah, there were 13 clinical sites around the US, and each of those had site staff. So it was a big extended team working on it.
And it's all US, it's not international?
This one is. Lumosity is international, but this particular ADHD product is just US.
And are there any international studies going on?
There are international studies going on. Some interesting topics, but I think they're farther away from a new product or a new, kind of a new application.
Fascinating. Question, Becca?
Yes.
You may have answered this, but these improvements that you showed in that last slide, you know, they persist. So if you did this now, but then you didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
Thing,
Yeah. Great question. So the question for those on Zoom here was, do improvements persist? How long do these effects last? We have not published this data yet, but we presented it at a couple neuroscience conferences. Based on this same data set, we could look at some people who did a bunch of Lumosity use. They took their second test that you're seeing here and look at the improvement, and then they stopped using Lumosity, but they came back later and they took the test again. Our best estimate from that is that these effects decay over the course of many months. So after about 10 months, you would have lost about half of the effect. Over the next 10 months, you would lose about half of that effect. I like to think of it as actually very similar to going to the gym. So if you go to the gym consistently for a while and then you stop, Well, if you test yourself a few months later, you'll still see some effect of that, of that dedicated gym time. It won't be all the way gone, but it won't be as strong as it was. And kind of a similar time course, a similar durability for these effects.
I have a question.
Yes. Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, here, let me say one last response to this, and then let's go to that one. So yes, the pathways are still there if you were to do it again. And actually, some of the researchers are taking an approach where they do a period of use, and then they'll do these like booster sessions every few months. So you do it pretty consistently, and then you come back a few months later for 2 weeks, and you do it consistently for those 2 weeks. And you come back again a few months later, you do it consistently for those 2 weeks. So yes, that model is something that people are working on. Okay, thanks. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
My question was, these products that you make, are they for diagnostic? The ones that are for medical? Diagnostic as well as therapeutic, or
Right.
one or the other?
On the medical side, we only have one product, and it is not diagnostic. So the one on the medical side is for ADHD, and it's a therapeutic or a treatment. We
Okay.
do separately have well, it's an assessment. It's not diagnostic for any medical condition, but it is for measurement of cognitive performance in a general population. So we do have computerized assessment as well.
And you've answered the other question earlier. Thank you.
So before you officially started this, Ron Saylor asked you about the effects of alcohol. And as a physician, I know that there are drugs that we prescribe that may impair people's cognitive function. And then there are things that are believed to enhance cognitive function. And we know that from news of prominent people who take Adderall, and I think that comes to mind, especially in your ADHD group. I mean,
Right.
in that ADHD group, can you show that people are taking Adderall? Does it affect their performance?
Right. So the question is about the relationship between this type of training and something like taking Adderall. Yeah, taking drugs. And so in this particular case, so the first thing I'll say is the effect size of Adderall is very big. So the size of the improvements from this kind of game-based training is smaller than the effect size of Adderall on reducing ADHD symptoms. Of course, there's a big, difference on the risk side. There are all kinds of side effects and other reasons. And also Adderall would only work when you're using it, and then it would be gone from your system afterwards. So the comparison between these two is pretty interesting. Your specific question, we've run 2 clinical trials here with this ADHD product. In the first one, all of the participants were not taking medications like Adderall. In the second one, they all were taking medications like Adderall. So FDA approved medications for ADHD, but they were not optimally treated. So they still had some ADHD symptoms that weren't being addressed by the drug. And we actually did find that the combination, so when they were taking the drugs that they had been prescribed and they added this on top, they got additional benefit beyond what they originally had. And actually, that might be the most exciting thing for the investigators, those researchers actually running these studies. These are really, this ADHD population that's already taking a drug and it's not treating them fully, that's the really tough patient to treat, right? And so if you can add something in and begin to get additional benefit, that could be really helpful. So we're still working through all of the results of that clinical trial, but we did find improvements even when the participants were taking something like Adderall as well.
And this treatment here, what is the cognitive, that function that it's going for?
Yeah, so attention. So the main clinical trial results here, there was an improvement on It's called the Test of Variables of Attention. It's a computerized measure of sustained and selective attention. And then also improvements on the rating from a blinded clinician. So the doctors who were involved in the study, they didn't know whether the participants were using the kind of Luminosity program or a control program, but they rated at the end, they just said, how much better, how much improved is this person's ADHD? And so it was this global measure and they improved on that as well. So it's primarily targeting attention, but then we also looked at kind of global ADHD status.
But when the patients play this game, they're doing just one
Great.
game, right?
So it's 13 different games in this one. And really it's in the world of executive control or executive functions. So attentional control is certainly an important part of it. It does include some things like task switching, like that ebb and flow game that we were playing, working memory as well. So these are all, even though it's called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it goes beyond attention. There are also impairments in some of these other cognitive domains. So it actually includes several different games here.
And is there grammatical reasoning going
to there is no grammatical reasoning test, but I doubt it. Yes. Oh, and this being the Luminosity, the nice thing is the Luminosity program in a limited version is totally free. So you sign up and you can get three different recommended games each day and use it for a while. And
that if you want.
sure, actually, and we're right in the midst of a, let's see, does it work if I
So how many more
I
slides
can
do you
open,
have?
the slides were only, I can, yeah, it's a summary slide essentially here
Yeah,
that.
so
that
let's
is
end
just
your
repeating.
PowerPoint
Sure.
and just go out to the internet. Because you would do something here to find it, right?
Yes, thank you. Good. So, and I guess I will not be able to sign into my own account here and show you what it looks like once you're in there, because I don't remember my password, which would probably be a good use of my Luminosity training, but I use a password manager instead. So the idea here is at lumosity.com. If you get started, you can register for an account for free, and then it will, yeah, I guess there's not too much to demo. So it starts you out with 3 games that will help you understand what it's all about and sort of give you a baseline. One of the ideas here is different people are starting at different levels of difficulty. So there's this broad range, the game should be meeting you where you are. And so it wants to help you kind of calibrate, get your baseline. So it's always going to keep you challenging enough that it's not boring, but not so that it's, feels too, yeah, exactly. So that it feels frustrating. So I guess there's not a, not
I
a
do
big
have an
visual
account,
here.
but I don't know if I remember mine either.
There is a subscription that gives you kind of access to all of the games and yeah, all of the games, additional statistics and personalization and sort of feedback. And the most common one there is an annual subscription. We're right in the middle of a price change. So it's currently $60 a year, but it will likely be $80 a year very soon. And so that's for kind of the additional bells and whistles and access. But starting with the free version and yeah, playing it, trying out, I think is a great. Yes, so you can play it on your phone or your computer. The same account works on both. So if you sign up on your computer, you can then get the app on your phone and use that same account. Well,
Fascinating. Yeah, thank you so much. Any other questions out there in Zoom land?
No, thank you. That was a wonderful talk.
Yeah,
thank you.
Karen?
Oh, I didn't know if I was interrupting. I'm just wondering, and you may have covered this, but Has it been used at all with people that are actually experiencing Alzheimer's and dementia and so forth?
Yes, there are, and this is a really interesting story. I guess first I'll start by saying, outside of ADHD, everything that I would talk about here is really preliminary. So this is based on research studies that have been done using the software, but I think there's still a lot to figure out. So for Alzheimer's disease, there were two really big and interesting studies that were run in the last few years by universities. And they looked very similar, but they came to different conclusions. So let me describe. So in both of them, the participants had mild cognitive impairment, or kind of the earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease. There was a little bit of a difference in the populations, and I'll say that in a minute. One study was run at Stanford, one was run at Duke and Columbia. In both cases, they had a Luminosity group, and then they had a crosswords group, very similar to the study that I just showed you. The fascinating thing is that they concluded different things. So the Duke and Columbia one concluded that actually the Luminosity group did not do better. And there was some hint that maybe the crosswords group did better than the Luminosity group in terms of kind of maintaining cognitive performance on some of the key measures. The Stanford study concluded the opposite. It concluded that the Luminosity group had improvements that were greater than the crosswords group. So what's going on here? There's a lot more research to be done. The thing that's really fascinating to me, so the difference in populations, the Stanford study was all early MCI. So early MCI by definition is you have some measurable cognitive impairment, but it is not yet impacting your daily functioning. Whereas the other one, the Columbia Duke one, it was early and late MCI. So late MCI, now this is impacting your daily functioning. I suspect that, and so again, this is speculation, this is something that needs to be followed up on. I suspect that if you get a level of impairment that actually makes it hard for you to learn how to play these games, where you're not really sure what you're supposed to do, you don't really remember playing that same game the next time you do it, so you have to relearn the rules. I suspect that there's a level of impairment that means you're not going to be able to use these in kind of the intended, the correct way. And I bet that's the difference here. I bet if you already have some level of impairment where it's harder to learn new tasks, then doing something that's very familiar, like crossword puzzles, if you've done that all your life, or something else that's good mental stimulation, but you already know how to do it, that could be a really good recipe there. And if you don't have that level of impairment and you are able to pick up these new tasks, these new games, perhaps then it's right for that group. That's my speculation at this point. But yeah, great question about Alzheimer's disease and mild cognitive impairment.
Thank you.
I'll share my favorite. And again, this is preliminary. This is on the medical side. So this was a group at Ohio State University. What they did was they looked at older adults who were about to undergo major surgery. So the most frequent complication here is postoperative delirium. So if you finish your surgery and then during recovery, you have delirium, that may be treated in the moment, but it actually has this cascade of negative outcomes where kind of following postoperative delirium, there are sometimes complications that can happen over the following months or years. So if we could reduce the incidence of postoperative delirium, that could have a great benefit to people. And so what this group did was, instead of Luminosity after surgery, they actually did it before surgery. So their question was, can you have cognitive prehabilitation? Could you use this in the weeks leading up to major surgery? And might that have some protective benefit? And again, this is a single study, needs to be reproduced, but they found a really exciting result. They published it in a strong journal. So JAMA Surgery, this paper showing initial evidence that something like cognitive prehabilitation could help with reducing the incidence of these post-operative complications. And I think that this idea, again, I would treat this as preliminary. We need to follow up on this, but I'm very excited about this. And actually the same group is now doing this with cognitive training paired with sleep hygiene, with nutrition, with stress management, kind of with all of the likely suspects about healthy cognition. Can you have a program leading up to major surgery that is focused on these like healthy, these things that support healthy cognition, and might that have good protective benefits against some of the complications that might occur? So that's an area that I'm especially interested in how it will play out.
Comment about AI versus brain. The brain is far superior and always will be. All the billions of neurons and better than any AI that has to be programmed.
Sure. Well, yes. So we've got to vote for the human brain over AI, and I'm personally in favor of the brain. But yes, that's a good perspective.
So what is your job primarily?
So my job, so I'm the CEO of Lumos Labs, so I kind of lead the team in its various aspects. Most of my focus, because of my background, is on this new medical side, so the development of digital medicine, leading the research programming, but then I am still involved some of the time on product development and running the business and things like this. So a bit of many different things, but where I like to spend the majority of my time is on the research side and on this new direction of digital medicine.
And going back to the company in general, you said there's at least a dozen different games, and all the time there's new ones coming out, or are you given up on some, or?
Yes, so there are, I think right now there are 45 different games that are in the product. There have been ones in the past that we've taken out, that we've made obsolete. There are some that we've updated and improved, and then also new games that come out. So yes, a combination of all of these. There are some that another direction, it's not in the product yet, but something that we're working on. I really like the analogy of, or the comparison to physical fitness, and think of a personal trainer at the gym. So imagine someone who can actually walk with you while you're doing your exercises. Imagine someone who can look at your technique and give pointers and tips. We could actually do the same sort of thing. So I'm really interested in the idea of using these Luminosity games. Imagine kind of an interval training version where you are alternating between modes of really pushing yourself, really something that's high cognitive load, that's really mentally taxing, interspersed with something that's maybe more relaxing and slower paced. I want to practice, or I want to test out some of these gym models in Lumosity. I think that it could both be fun and also might be a good way to get people to really put in the effort and train these things.
And do you see it going where patients go to their doctor and get tested cognitively, and the doctor comes back and says, hey, here's what you did. You need to work on your visual fields and your memory. So find some things to do that. And then they could come to your thing and find the games that work on the things that they were prescribed to work on, right? Does that happen?
That happens a lot without us knowing. So we actually hear from doctors quite often who are like, hey, my patient keeps talking to me about their, Lumosity performance index score. What am I supposed to tell them about? And so we provide some information, but I think that what you're describing could be a helpful thing in the future, where we actually build out the tools that could be used by a neuropsychologist or a clinician to kind of to help someone. So we don't have that currently, but I think that's an interesting direction.
Right. Yeah. And are there any collaborations with other companies that do this? Are there other companies out there?
There are, yes.
Games, right?
So yes, there are other companies that have kind of the brain game, either apps or websites. There are kind of peripheral to that. As you know, there are programs that involve other types of things like Duolingo, where you're learning a new language, or you know, other types of activities that I think are also great and supportive of cognitive health, but aren't this exact same approach to like training those underlying skills. So I think there are a number of software tools that are helpful and fun and interesting.
But do you try to keep up with the Joneses and try to figure out, well, we gotta have a new product because so-and-so developed this and now they have more of our market than we.
There's always trying to keep up with the interesting things that are going on out there. For a while, virtual reality approaches here were kind of getting a lot of buzz. So could you do the same types of playing, but it feels immersive? It feels like you are kind of in the middle of the game. And, you know, there are some companies that have been trying to do that. I'll say we aren't really trying to keep up with everything that comes along. I think some of them will prove to be fads, but when we do see something that we think is a nice blend of effectiveness with, you know, engagement and fun, then we try to follow up.
You ever had children play these games?
Have we had children play these games? We used to have a different product that was called Lumi Kids, and it was like a very cute and fun game for children. It's not available right now, but we actually may revive it. Lumosity, as it exists right now, it goes down to age 13. So we don't allow kind of accounts for people under 13. And that's mainly just for like data privacy reasons. So it's mainly just, we don't want to have, they can, although from age 13 up to age 20, just the changes year by year are dramatic. So you can see these like rapid changes in cognitive performance with development. It's impressive.
Question?
Yes, go ahead.
Is there any allowance for people's behavior, emotional aspects while playing this? It sounds so technical. You know, there are some things that frighten people or make them sad, you know, an emotional attachment. You're frozen. Hello.
And we have looked at the relationship between mood and performance on these games, and there is a relationship, and it's not a terribly exciting one. Kind of the better mood translates to better cognitive performance across these games. Is that what you meant by kind of allowance?
Emotional attachment to whatever it is. It may not be to the game, but does it translate when you approach the game or look at the results of the game?
So yes, and we've only taken a small look at that, like I described. So just this single item, what is your mood now? And we've shown that it correlates. But I think that that's a really interesting topic that we haven't gone into in much detail.
It's mostly mechanical at the moment.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Question. This goes back to the very beginning, talking about neuroplasticity, but it made me think of you were talking about, are there more than ways for a signal to get from point A to point B? There have been studies in multiple sclerosis, people with multiple sclerosis impairment, functional MRI study, where the functional MRI scan can see the place in the brain that's responsible for some functions. Whether your right thumb, you can see place in the left motor strip that lights up, it's doing that. And what they found is people with MS may have rearranged patterns and multiple spots, even on both sides of the brain, for doing that same function. So, and that's something that
I had
functional MRI scans cost a whole lot of money, but that's something you could do.
So the comment or question was, the observation fMRI in people with multiple sclerosis, and sometimes the mapping of some either motor signal, or the mapping of where you might expect some function to be in the brain may be remapped as a result of kind of the brain's neuroplasticity in response to the multiple sclerosis. Yeah, let me tell you about an interesting thing that we just finished up. So we did bring in 24 people to go into an MRI imaging center, and they went into the magnet and they played Luminosity games while getting their brain scanned. So functional MRI during Luminosity gameplay. It was relatively small, so only 24 people, and each of them played 12 different games, but we're just in the process of analyzing this. Two things are really interesting here. One is there are certainly kind of areas lighting up, regions or circuits that you would expect to be involved in whatever cognitive task they're playing. But we have this question about, what about individual variability? What if this person is playing this game or solving this task just in a different way than this person over here? Might you be able to pick up that difference in the fMRI? And we haven't come to a conclusion on that yet. So we're still early in the analysis. What I'd really like to do is, now you imagine you've got 24 people playing 12 different games, this big, we've got all of these different scans. Could you take a scan without knowing who it was from and without knowing what game they were playing, but then based on your understanding of all the other scans, could you actually determine, okay, it was this participant playing this game? Could you actually get enough of a sort of brain fingerprint, a unique signature? And so we'll try to do that.
You may need artificial intelligence.
Yeah, right. That's right.
This seems to be dependent on the visual sense primarily. You have 4 dominant senses of the weighting, and a lot of people use a multiple set of things, inputs, in order to lock a memory into an experience. And how do you test for the deaf or the blind, or those kinds of things that are outside of the visual alphanumeric realm?
That's a great question. So you're right. The observation is that this seems to be very visual heavy. Yeah, this is centered on vision. So one, I think that's a limitation of the program currently, and we could extend it. Especially in the auditory realm, there are a lot of interesting cognitive tasks that use auditory stimuli, or even voice as the response as well. And I think that we've done some exploration in that direction, and so we may continue to go there. A funny story, I was talking about this with a neuroscientist at UC Davis who focuses on, his work is in the auditory realm, and he was convinced that actually all of the sound cueing, all of the kind of, the sound effects and the cueing that go along with the games, that was actually critically important, and that the auditory side is actually already quite important in the training and learning process. But it is possible to play all of these with your sound turned off, so they're not critical there. Yes, I think that at least auditory tasks are ones that we have considered and will likely try to introduce, but you're absolutely right. You could expand this into each sensory area, and we just haven't yet.
I'm waiting.
It's good to know. Good feedback.
The bottom line is you're pretty screwed when you're blind, I think.
Yeah. Learn to cook.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bob. This was great.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks.